Hey guys, Mr. Hanley here, and we are going to be in 1 Kings chapter 11. If you remember from last time, Solomon has died, and now his son is going to take over for him. A couple of things. Solomon, we know, was very, very wise and was big into being wise and making wise decisions. Yet in his own life, he made some very foolish decisions. He chased after being popular and what the world would think of him, and he married tons of women and got chased after foreign gods and everything, and he made a lot of bad choices. And so he's at the end of his life, or now he died in our story, but by the end of his life, he wanted to take back all those choices, and that's why he wrote the book of Proverbs. And one of the reasons why he wrote the book of Proverbs was to pass on wisdom to his son. And this is the only one of his sons that we know about, and we're going to read about him in this chapter today, and we'll see if he actually takes his dad's advice. Chapter 1, but King Solomon, actually, no, I had the wrong, we're in chapter 12, that's what it is. Sorry, 1 Kings chapter 12. And Rehoboam, that's Solomon's son, Rehoboam. Now, before I go any farther, distinguish that from Jeroboam. Jeroboam was the guy we talked about last chapter. Jeroboam was the head of the labor force under Solomon's reign. And you remember, he rebelled. Jeroboam rebelled because Solomon was so tough on the labor force, was so tough on the workers, and Jeroboam kind of rebelled and said, you can't treat people this way. Solomon, and then Ahijah also promised that he would be king one day, and Solomon actually tried to kill him, and Jeroboam fled to Egypt. But his son's name is Rehoboam. Now, if those sound a little bit alike, you might be like, oh, they sound like the same person. Remember, we have names like Brandon and Brendan in our society. We have Isabel and Isabella. We have names that sound a lot alike. So they have Rehoboam and Jeroboam. So Rehoboam, the son of Solomon, went to Shechem, for all of Israel had gone to Shechem to make him king. So during the ceremony after Solomon dies, Rehoboam goes to Shechem, he's being made king. And it happened when Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, heard it. He was still in Egypt, for he had fled from the presence of King Solomon, so he'd been in Egypt. They sent and called him, and Jeroboam and the whole assembly of Israel came and spoke to Rehoboam. So he comes back from Egypt and goes with the rest of the elders, and they all approach Rehoboam with a very important request for Rehoboam. They said, verse 4, your father made our yoke heavy. Now therefore lighten the burdensome service of your father and his heavy yoke which he put on us, and we will serve you. So they come to him and say, listen, we have a request. Your dad was great. Everything about him was great. He's a wise guy and everything. But we can't go through another time of it. I mean, he was really bad with the taxes and really hard on us. He expected us a couple months a year to spend away from our family just building things. And so they come to Rehoboam and say, we got to be done with all this labor force and all these high taxes. We just got to be done with it. Please, we request from you. And that's what they say to Rehoboam. And you see, Solomon was really harsh with his people. He didn't, but they accepted it because he was Solomon. He was world famous. He was very wise. He had a lot of positive attributes, and he didn't have to use military force to get them to obey him. They just loved him enough that they wanted to obey his words. But once he was gone, they're like, yeah, we could use a change. We could use a little bit lightening of the load. And they promised him, we'll serve you if you just lighten the load, which is actually kind of peculiar when you think about it, because Jeroboam had been told the last chapter by a prophet named Ahijah. He had been told the last chapter that he was going to be made king over 10 of the tribes of Israel. Remember, Ahijah came to him, took the cloth, ripped it up in 10 pieces, and gave it to him and said, you are going to be, God promised him, you will be king for as long as you and your sons and your grandsons are faithful to God. And Jeroboam here, though, is saying, hey, if you lighten the load, we'll serve you. I'll follow you. And so Rehoboam said to them, depart for 3 days and come back to me. He said, basically, let me think about it. And so during that 3 days, verse 6, King Rehoboam consulted the elders who stood before his father Solomon while he lived. He said, how do you advise me to answer these people? So these were advisors from the old guard, from his dad, the guys that would advise him, give him advice, which, I mean, that must have been the worst job ever. When you think about it, or the most useless feeling job ever, to give advice to King Solomon, the wisest guy who ever lived. What advice does he need from you? But anyway, these advisors had worked with Solomon and had seen unbelievably wise choices made by Solomon. And I said, what should we, what, King Rehoboam said, what should I do? And the people said, you know what? Verse 7, if you will be a servant to these people today and serve them and answer them and speak good words to them, they will be your servants forever. They said, all right, we know it feels like you're kind of being weak and just giving the people what they want. Because that was thought of as being a weak ruler, if you just give the people what they want. And they say, we know it feels like you're kind of taking a loss. But if you approach them humbly and become a servant to them, serve them, then they will follow you. And interestingly, that is what people miss a lot of times in leadership. If you're a leader, a lot of times it means you have to be a servant of somebody else. You know, if you're a pastor of a church, a pastor actually is serving all the people in the congregation. We think of it like a triangle like this, where there's a regular congregation, and you go with the ministry leaders and people like that, and eventually goes up, and the person at the top, the pastor, is like over everyone and decides on what everything goes on, and he's the one that's, you know, in reality, it's like an upside down triangle. You get all the people in the congregation who don't serve anybody, and you got the people who are serving just the people above them, and then when you get to the very bottom of the triangle, you have the pastor who's sitting there serving everybody. You know, he's trying to minister to everybody, and that's what a minister is. And a minister is a servant. They serve. They try to humble themselves and put themselves in a position to put everybody before themselves. You know, the people in the congregation, they can just put themselves first. They just think of themselves. If you're just a regular person in the congregation, you don't really have to think about anybody else at any point in time. You can just do what you want. And if you want to do something nice for somebody else, you can. But a pastor has to serve and do the best things for everybody in his congregation. He has to serve everybody. And they say to Rehoboam, if you'll be a servant right now and serve these people, I know it feels like you're taking a weak approach. They'll stick with you. They'll be right on by your side. Verse 8, but he rejected the advice which the elders had given him. He didn't like their advice. Because, you know, he's a new king. He wants to show himself that he wants to show everybody that he's a tough guy. He's strong. And he didn't like this advice because it required him being humble and being a servant. And that's not what he wanted. He wanted to be king, tough king. So, what did he do? He consulted the young men who had grown up with him and who stood before him. So, this is like he's shopping for advice from people who, you know, who wants to give me the best advice. And this really isn't a good way to go about things in many, many ways, but there's not a good way to go about things. Like, think about you asking people for advice, or you know, let's say you cook a meal and you ask 5 people what they think of it, and you're like, and you say to people, I just want your honest opinion. Just tell me what you think of it. You give it to the first person, they say, this is gross. Second person, needs more salt. The third person, I think you overcooked it. The fourth person just throws up. I don't know. And the fifth person goes, yeah, it's pretty good. If you sit there and go, oh, look, the fifth person says it's pretty good, so obviously it's pretty good. What you're doing is you're just trying to find somebody who is going to tell you what you want to hear. You're not actually looking for real advice. So the better way of going about things, the better way of taking advice is you need to find, and this is a good thing for every Christian, no matter what age. I'm still doing it myself. Find people in your life who are wiser than you. Usually they're older than you. They can be your parents, definitely at the age that you're at. They should be your parents. But they're older than you, wiser than you, have spent more time in a relationship with God than you, and you ask their advice, and guess what? You consider it. That doesn't mean you do whatever they say. Sometimes God, you know, leads you in a different direction, but you seriously consider that advice, even if it's something you don't like. Because what it can do is allow you to learn. If you get to the point that you're not going to listen to anything that somebody tells you, unless it's something that you like, well, then you will no longer grow. You won't. You will no longer grow. The only way, I mean, think about if when we're playing basketball, during basketball practice, I tell you all the time, okay, keep your elbow up, keep your shoulder still, keep this, keep that. The kids who don't like to listen and don't take my advice and go, okay, whatever, they don't get any better. They get to a point and they just plateau and they never get any better. But the kids who sit there and listen and they focus and they try to do it the right way, put my hand here, put my elbow here, and think about what they're doing, they just keep getting better and better and better and better the whole time. It's being teachable. Teachable is the word. It's you're able to be taught. You're humble enough to realize you don't know everything. But Rehoboam here doesn't like the response from the elders, who are actually very wise, and he instead rejects it and gets advice from his buddies. This is something that, now you guys are getting to be preteens, or you guys are all about 11. Kayleen, actually, yesterday was your birthday, right? Because today you're watching this on Friday. Yesterday, Thursday, was your birthday, so happy birthday, Kayleen. You guys are all about 11, I think. Very soon, you guys will be preteens, and then you guys will be teenagers. Now, a very common thing among teenagers is teenagers don't like to listen to parents. Why? Because teenagers oftentimes think they know everything. And so their parents will give them advice, and their parents will say, listen, I really think you shouldn't do that. You shouldn't spend your money on that. You shouldn't go there. You shouldn't do this. And they'll just hate the advice of the parent, and instead they'll go to a friend and say, hey, fellow friend who is also 14, what do you think I should do in life? And the other 14-year-old will be like, well, listen, here's what life's all about. And they'll give them life lessons for somebody who can't even drive a car yet, and they have all the answers about life or whatever. That is the silliest thing to do. The younger you can get, and the younger you can realize that good advice from older people, from adults, is good, and to understand those things and to take that advice for granted, the quicker you will mature. You become a mature person much earlier. Everybody wants to be mature. All kids want to be more mature, and all kids want to be considered older and everything. But it's funny, the way kids react, the kids that want to be treated like grown-ups the most, oftentimes act the least like grown-ups, okay? If you picture a kid that really wants to be treated like a grown-up, a lot of times what they're doing is they're kicking and screaming and having a temper tantrum. I want to be treated like a grown-up. Treat me like a mature person. Treat me like I'm, older and this and that. That's not how older people act, okay? The way an older, mature person would act is to show that they are older, to show that they're mature, to show that they can handle something, and to not let one little thing that doesn't go their way throw everything off, and they have a temper tantrum, and they throw their toys around. What you're doing then when you act that way is that you're showing that you can't handle it. You're showing you're not mature. You're showing you're not ready for whatever it is that you're requesting to do. So when we take advice from, other kids that are our age, that kid who's 14, they have no idea what it's like to be 15. Think about that. They don't even know what it's like to be 15 yet. They're just 14, right? Your 11-year-old friends don't have any clue what it's like to be 16, 17, 18 years old, 12 years old. They're just 11, right? Your parents have every idea what it's like to be all of those ages because they have already been them. They know what it's like to be a teenager. They know what it's like to be 11. They know what it's like, so they have good advice. Doesn't mean they're right all the time, but they have at least some wisdom to share. But he goes to his friends in verse 8 and asks them, what do you guys think I should do? And like typical immature, unwise kids, they say, hey, this is how you should speak to the people. You should say, well, your father made our yoke heavy, but you make it lighter. So you should say to him, my little finger shall be thicker than my father's waist. What this means is essentially, he goes, oh, you think my dad was rough? If how tough he was this much, I'm going to be way, way more. Basically saying, like, if you were to make his toughness, his problems, what's the yoke? They call it yoke, the burden. That's where I was looking for. If you consider the burden that Solomon put on the people as a person, and you have with a head and arms and a body, he said the person that represents my burden, the little tiny finger, is going to be even bigger than his waist. So picture the comparison of a little finger to an entire waist. And if somebody's little finger is bigger than somebody else's waist, picture how much bigger they are going to be than that person. He says, that's how you should answer them. Oh, you think my dad was bad? Oh, I'm going to be tougher. You think my dad was tough? You've seen nothing. And he said, I'm going to tax just absolutely everything and make the labor force really hard. And he basically becomes a dictator and says that he is going to rule with an iron fist and force everybody to do everything he wants. And he says, well, now where's my father put a heavy yoke on you? I'm going to add to your yoke. I'm going to add to your burdens. My father chastised you with whips, but I'll chastise you with scourges. He says, however much my dad disciplined you, I'll make it even worse. All this stuff. So that was his answer to the people. So Jeroboam and all the people in verse 12 came to Rehoboam the third day as the king had directed, saying, come back to me the third day. And the king answered the people roughly, basically said, how dare you ask for less burdens? And he rejected the advice the elders had given him. And the king did not listen to the people, for this event was from the Lord, that he might fulfill his word, which he had spoken by Ahijah, the Shilonite, to Jeroboam. So basically God put this together, made sure Rehoboam didn't listen to the elders, and because he was going to take 10 tribes away. And so all of Israel saw the king didn't listen. The people answered to the king, saying, what share have we in David? We have no inheritance, the son of Jesse. To your tents, O Israel, now see to your own house, O David. And so Israel departed the tents. Basically, it said, David's from Judah. We have nothing to do with him. We were fine with David and Solomon being king, but you know what? If you're going to be like that, Judah, you can stay there, and we'll just get a new king. And so in that silly decision, and we all make bad decisions, but usually our bad decisions can be fixed relatively easily. I made a bad decision the other day. I screwed into a wall, and I hit a water pipe in my wall. Okay, and that was a bad decision, but relatively easy to fix. It was, had to open up the wall and put a new pipe in. It wasn't a very fun fix, but compared to Rehoboam had a mistake where, 10 out of 12 tribes just left. Okay, picture that. I gave this example yesterday. That would be like, a president that we have making a decision, making a certain choice. That was an unwise choice. And then basically every other state in the country, other than like New England, is gone. We just have like Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine left. And that's the United States. And everywhere else forms its own country. That would be insane. That's what happened here. And so, King Rehoboam sent Adoram, who was in charge of the revenue. Okay, so King Rehoboam then sent a guy named Adoram to go collect taxes. And to go collect, he's not thinking. He goes and sends him to collect taxes from the people. And Israel's like, no. And not only do they say no, they actually stone the guy. They kill the guy. And so King Rehoboam had to run, and he runs back away to Jerusalem, which is in Judah. And verse 20, what happens is they make Jeroboam the king. They heard Jeroboam came back, and he was the leader of the labor force. He's probably very sympathetic to all the people that had to work for Solomon, and they knew that he was. And so they ended up electing him to be their new king. When Rehoboam gets back to Jerusalem, he actually starts getting an army together and saying, I'm going to show those 10 tribes what's what. And by the way, if you're wondering what the two tribes were Judah and Benjamin. Those are the only two that stayed. But so Rehoboam gets back to Jerusalem, gets an army together, and says, I'm going to go fight them and get them back. But a prophet visits him. Ahijah had visited Jeroboam before. Another new guy named Shemaiah, he's a prophet, comes to him. And this is the only time we ever see this Shemaiah guy. But he was a prophet from God. He comes to Rehoboam and says, basically, hey, you're getting an army together to go fight the rest of Israel. Don't do it. I allowed this thing to happen. And if you go and do it, then you're going against me. And you'd think that because Rehoboam took such bad advice before, that he would take the bad advice again. But he actually acts wisely. He puts away the army and doesn't attack them, which is, again, something that seems weak, to be like a whole group of people go, we're rebelling against you, we are getting rid of you, and we're gone. And then he just goes, okay, which is essentially what he has to do now. But he wisely takes Shemaiah's advice. Verse 25, we see remember, Jeroboam was told by Ahijah from God, if you obey God and do what he wants you to do, he will make you a king forever. Let's see how Jeroboam responds to it. Jeroboam built Shechem in the mountains of Ephraim, so he needed a capital. The capital of Jerusalem was in the capital of Jerusalem was in Judah, so that there's no longer a capital for the northern tribes in Israel. So he has to build a new capital. He built it in Shechem in the mountains of Ephraim. He dwelled there, and he also went out from there and built Penuel. And Jeroboam said in his heart, now the kingdom may return to the house of David. If these people go to offer sacrifices in the house of the Lord Jerusalem, then the heart of this people will turn back to the Lord, Rehoboam the king of Judah, and they will kill me and go back to Rehoboam the king of Judah. So now self-preservation and paranoia creep in. Because where do the people go to make sacrifices? They go to the temple. Where is the temple? It's in Jerusalem. Where is Jerusalem? In Judah, in the south. So he begins to worry, well, you know what? The people have to go and make these sacrifices once a year. They're all going to be going back to Jerusalem. When they get back to Jerusalem, they're going to be like, oh, it's kind of nice here in Judah. And they're going to want to stay. And he's worried the elders of Israel will have him executed, and they'll decide they want to join back up with Rehoboam. And so he said, you know what? I'm going to I'm going to make sure they can't go back to Jerusalem. And he sets up what is really terrible. He sets up calves of gold. He makes golden calves, just like Aaron did hundreds of years earlier. He makes altars to calves of gold and put one in a city called Bethel, which is in the south, and one in Dan, which is in the north. So basically, two different places where they can go. One in the north if you're closer, one in the south if you're closer. And he said, I'll put a golden calf there, and you can just do the same sacrifices to God there. And so he wasn't having them worship a different God. He was having them worship the true God. But the problem was he was doing it in a way that God didn't want to happen. God was very specific that he did not want people to make carved images to him. And Jeroboam was like, yeah, that's fine, but we got to make this carved image and worship God. And so this became a sin that people began to worship, and that's how they began to do their worship, was to bowing down to these idols. Not only that, though, he made shrines on the high places, which God specifically said he doesn't want them to make anything on worship on the high places. And he made priests from every class of people, not just Levites. Remember, God specifically said the Levites were supposed to be the priests, and that's it. And but he said, you know what? Anybody can be a priest. And he worked by his own intellect. And the people listened too, because you know what always works on people is convenience. People like things to be convenient. We all want things to be easier. And so, serving God and trusting in God can sometimes be a bit inconvenient, can be uncomfortable sometimes. But he appealed to their convenience, and the people just went right along with it. And so basically he made these calves and got the people to worship them. So that's where we are leaving the story off this week. See ya.